This is a big day for us, and I think it's fair to say that sometimes talking about systems change is hard, and it feels really difficult, and it feels so much easier to just do what we've always done, buy land, manage nature reserves, do engagement and education, which we're still doing, but sometimes it feels like the work we do, we're almost pushing a rock uphill. There are so many forces opposing the work we do, so many things. We spend a lot of time fighting, a lot of time challenging, and even defending protected areas, which should be sacrosanct, right? So, there's a lot of really difficult things that we're doing. So I'd just like to invite you all to say a little bit about you, who you are, why you're here, and then we'll get into a discussion. So, do you want to start, Craig?
Lovely to be here. I love coming to AGMs of individual wildlife trusts, and it's very important for me in my role to stay connected and hear from individual members of local wildlife trusts. If I can, I'll just take a couple of minutes to talk about the wildlife trusts nationally, because Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust is absolutely the beating heart of the wildlife trust movement nationally. You should be very, very proud of the role that your local trust plays in helping us move forward as a national movement as well. But across the country, we are 46 locally run wildlife trusts, like Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trusts. And when you add it together, we've actually got huge scale. So if I tell you that we've got almost 1 million members across the country, and in fact our membership growth has been really strong over the last 5 years, so we've added almost 100,000 new members across the Wildlife Trust in the last 5 years, which, for example, is a bigger membership than many of the political parties, we've added more members in the last 5 years than people that ever voted for Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. Let's just put it that way. It's a good one. We've got more nature reserves collectively than McDonald's has got restaurants. In fact, 1,000 more. We estimate that 60% of the British population live within 3 miles of one of our reserves. We have more school children go through our education programmes than any other British charity. And in fact, if you add it together, we're the 7th largest landholder in the UK. So that's the Wildlife Trust overall, which actually means that the Wildlife Trust is actually one of the largest nature federations in the world, not just in the UK. I was absolutely thrilled to become Chief Exec back in 2020. And we've gone through a process over the last 5 years of the ask from the board, national board at the time, was to try and make the Wildlife Trust more gutsy. There's a real sense that we need to stand up and speak up and have that bold and kind of confident voice. And we've been going through sort of strategy processes nationally that has sort of taken us in that direction as well. But I do want to pay huge tribute to Debbie and Hampshire and Wildlife Trust that have been a huge ally to me in helping take the Wildlife Trust nationally to where we need to go. And the journey's nothing like complete, and this strategy you're launching today will massively help us nationally to keep going in the direction we need to go.
Great. Thank you, Craig. Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Bonnin. I am a wildlife biologist and a broadcaster, and I've been making programs about animal behaviour, the environment, our impact on our planet for almost 20 years now. And during my career as a broadcaster, I began to scratch my head very early on, actually when I was doing my master's, about what it was that was stopping all these extraordinary scientists and conservationists and community leaders from achieving what they knew we had to achieve to protect our very life support systems so that we could just keep this planet habitable for us and all other life on it. And so more recently I've lent into economics and policy and other things that my sciencey brain doesn't really kind of lean into as easily as biochemistry or wild animal biology, which are the two things I did in uni. And so I've started talking more to the business sector than to the conservation sector as a communicator. And I've lent into leaders in this space who implicitly understand that to succeed, we need to connect the dots. In the global north, we've been encouraged to think very siloed, very compartmentalized, and that's got us to where we are. And at the very same time that I started evolving my role as a communicator, I was invited to become president of the Wildlife Trust just when you started as well. And I've learned so much from Craig and from Debbie and from so many members of the different trusts around the country. And I'm excited to be part of this conversation because I believe it is a crucial one. Systemic transformation has to happen at an economic level, at a policy level, at a societal level, if we're going to succeed in saving ourselves. And the planet will continue, but if we want to be part of it, this is what we need to do. I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you, Liz. Sue.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for asking me, Debbie. I'm really enjoying what I've been hearing so far. My name's Sue Pritchard, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Food Farming and Countryside Commission. And we are an independent charity working with new voices, diverse different voices, to shape a new version of the future for food and for farming and for the countryside, which acts on the climate crisis, the nature crisis, the health crisis, the inequalities crisis, and works to create a greener, healthier, fairer, more resilient future for all of us. I'm also a farmer, and I live on a small organic farm in Monmouthshire, just over the border in Wales, and we farm for conservation as well as farming livestock.
Thank you. Siôn.
Great, thank you. And I'm also really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm Siôn McGeever. I am the Chief Executive at the South Downs National Park Authority. I have been there for just 1 month shy of a year, having an absolutely fantastic time so far, learning a lot. Prior to that, I was at DEFRA, and for 4.5 years I led the work that basically oversaw policy for protected landscapes as a whole, also access to the outdoors, peatland, which we don't have a lot of in the South Downs, and I miss that part of my work, and soil health. And in that time, prior to that, I'd worked on international development and done quite a lot on environment. And in that time, I met many, many fantastic folk like yourselves, and decided that basically for the rest of my career, I wanted to be working on the things that we all care about. I also met these things called chief execs of national parks, and thought one day when I grow up, I'd quite like to be one of them. And the job came up, and so I took it, and I haven't regretted a minute of it. The South Downs National Park, which is just nearby, and which obviously 38% is in Hampshire, so a big proportion of our work overlaps. I think is the third largest, certainly the most inhabited. So we have about 120,000 people living in the park. It processes more planning applications, because we are a planning authority, than all the other national parks put together. And we are amongst the 10 largest planning authorities in the country by caseload. So the pressures are large, and the issues are very live for us.
Great. Thank you. Julia.
Hello, thank you. So I'm Julia Davies, and I'm here because I've got money, basically. And that's what I'm here to talk about as well. So about 7 years ago, I sold my stake in a company which I helped set up, which was Osprey Europe. Some of you might have our backpacks or our travel bags. And that turned me from being someone that's been a member of Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and WWF since I was a teenager, since I first had a bank account, into someone that actually got to speak to guys like Craig when he was at Friends of the Earth, and I got to become a major donor of these charities. And because I went from being someone that was gradually doing better in life into someone who was wealthy, as you hear about a lot these days, it made me realise that being wealthy gives you choices. It gives you choices in how you live your life, and it gives you choices in what you do with your life. And I very much see now money and wealth, which is being consolidated into the hands of fewer and fewer people, as basically being access to the tools to protect safe living conditions on Earth, or to just make them worse. So I always think of our world as being like a house on fire. And at the moment, most of the people have got the tools to that cupboard, that they could be unlocking all of the equipment we need to make life on Earth safe, are actually just accelerating. They're throwing petrol on the fire, basically. They're making it worse. So I started out when I came into some money, donating some money to some of the charities that I'd always supported. And I also, it coincided, me coming into money, with the State of Nature report, which made me realise that in my own country, we had allowed nature to collapse around ourselves. So my first thought was, right, I'll buy a bit of land, because I started to hear about this thing called rewilding. And I was going to buy some land and let it go. But of course, I was a lawyer. I was someone that had been involved in business. I wasn't an ecologist. So I started working with Dorset Wildlife Trust. And my first project with the Wildlife Trust was to help them buy a piece of land called Wild Woodbury, a community rewilding site. And that's wonderful. And I've now helped with multiple other acquisitions of sites around the country. But that's not enough, because nature can't survive on a little bit of land, just as we can't survive just in our house. That's not how the world works. So I'm increasingly involved in campaigning on a type of extremism that we don't hear so much about, and that is wealth extremism. And that is extremism that's consolidated wealth into the hands of fewer and fewer people, and those are the people who basically are causing the problems which you guys are trying to sort out. So sorry if that's too long an intro.
No, not at all. We'll get more into that as we go. And I've spent my career trying to protect and restore nature, and look at what we're up against, right? So we have to change things. So I'm going to start asking Sue to talk a little bit about this kind of food and farming stuff, because we know that 70% of our land is farmed. If you read the food strategy, you read the climate change reports, some of the conversations are around some of that land probably needs to be managed for climate and nature, but actually all of it needs to be managed regeneratively in some way, shape or form. How are you feeling about that transition? How's it going? Are we going to get there? What's your take on that transition?
Well, the transition is slow, and the transition is fragmented, and that's largely due to confused and misaligned policy and business signals. So the talk does not line up with the actual incentives available to farmers, land managers, to change their business practices. And I'm going to pick up on the changing systems question. It's lovely to follow you, Julia, on this one, because I think you are absolutely getting to the heart of what is the problem we now need to solve. You had this comment on your slides, Debbie, the system is broken. And I often challenge folk who say that, because in my experience of working in systems change over 45 years now, because I am very old, systems are rarely broken. If we think a system's broken, we are not looking for where the beneficiaries really are. And the system that we're operating in right now works really well for those people who are financialising and extracting value from the world that we live in. And so when we talk about systems change, we have to identify the aspects of the system that need to change, and then we have to strategise and act appropriately with that in mind. And that actually means that we now have to start talking about values and ethics and mindsets and assumptions, what we care about, what people care about, but also the kind of deep taken for granted assumptions about how the economy works, how it could work. That is presented to us so often as a given, as if it's a science, as if it's a kind of, natural science rather than a made-up science. Did I say that out loud? I did. But it's true. It is true. We just have a whole set of let's assume that statements around the economy. And if you say, well, what if we don't assume that? What if we make some different assumptions about how this world can work? Then we get to talk about different things. So I'll talk quickly, just very quickly if I can, about farming. Farmers do indeed manage or own 70% of the UK's land. But that group is incredibly diverse, incredibly different in terms of size, scale, business models, appetite for risk, knowledge, experience. And yet we talk about farmers as if they're one homogenous group. And therefore we try and create silver bullet strategies that can only ever be lowest common denominator to meet the diverse needs that farmers have. So I think one of the a second lesson, how do we affect systems change in this world? First, work out what is the system we're trying to change, name it, and name it assertively and confidently. And second, craft strategies that are really carefully devised for the people that we're trying to talk to. Again, a phrase I use quite often with my team, leadership's not about us, it's about the people that we're trying to talk to. There's no leadership without followership. And if we can't engage the people that need to change in a way that really makes sense to them, then we're just kind of performing. And that's not leadership at all. So we need granular strategies, we need diverse strategies, we need connected strategies. And we need to be able to think about co-creating a version of the future, not one vision, but a version of the future that everybody can see themselves in, that everybody can find themselves in, and are willing to work together to bring into being.
Yeah, I love that, Sue. I think that's absolutely right. And through place, that's a really great place to start, I feel. Liz, I can see you nodding. I think you need to come in here because we've talked a lot, haven't we, about just that connection piece. And if people don't belong and they don't feel it's relevant to them, we're not going to get anywhere, are we?
Yeah, and we've had loads of conversations. We've all had loads of conversations. And I'm just looking at this panel, and for me, it's testament to what needs to happen is this beautiful meeting of different sectors and of people who implicitly understand what needs to happen. So how do we translate that to people, the people whose hearts and minds we need to not convince, just bring back to the core truths of who we are and why we're here and what success is. And that, to quote David Attenborough, saving the planet is a communications challenge. And I know I'm a broadcaster, and I might be biased, but I do implicitly believe that more and more, the more I lean into learning from all of you amazing people about how we're going to create that change. And yes, it needs to be varied. And yes, we need to find relatedness with different sectors, with different people, with different priorities, but actually in a interesting way as well. I'm doing a lot of work with Indigenous and local communities at the moment, and they are very varied, not one size fits all either. But as a scientist, I've kind of reconnected to our essence, if that makes sense, to our, what it means to be human and who we are. And it all starts with connection, with remembering that we are a social species and that we thrive together. And gosh, in the global north, we don't do that anymore. We don't even know how to do that anymore. And again, as a member of the media sector, my gosh, have we done everybody a disservice. And yes, potentially, not even potentially, we know how the media outlets run. We know who owns them. When you talk about the big money, it's quite absurd who manipulates the news that you are all being fed on a day-to-day basis. We are being grossly misinformed, disinformed, and disenfranchised in a way that just makes my head swim. And I think, yes, it's an interconnected challenge, but at the very core, it's actually quite simple. We just need to reconnect to ourselves. We need to have leaders who actually take care of us and therefore inform us on not just the bad news headlines that we are obliterated with all the time that serves to reduce our bandwidth to such a tiny capacity that we can't lean into the things we actually need to lean into. We can ignore climate change because we have got enough on our plates as human beings to just feed our families and cope with the economic crisis, but actually the environmental crises that we face are not going to go away. So how do we get back to brass tacks and serve each other as a community? And I'm touching on lots of different aspects here because this is a beautifully interconnected, interwoven challenge, but ultimately one of the hardest things is to train our brains to think in an interconnected way again. I was at Wildscreen recently, this week, and there's an amazing filmmaker who is approaching storytelling in a completely different way. So as us all storytellers were like, oh my God, you're making my brain hurt because I can't, you're touching on this and you're touching on that. And actually it drove home that we just are not used to thinking in an interconnected way, so it all sounds and feels overwhelming. If we can crack that, if we can start to just lean into this beautiful, interconnected, interdependent web of life that we're a part of, we've cracked half the battle, is my particular subjective opinion. I know it's harder, and it's easy for me as a communicator to go, you guys have the hard job. I get to just communicate what you do. But there's an essence of simplicity and purity here, which is about connection, being unapologetic about how we get there in a way that is just like we hold hands figuratively and physically and try to start to support each other in a different way. And then a lot of this will flow naturally. That's just tipping the surface of what we need to do. But what I can also tell you that I'm absolutely 100% sure of is thanks to people like these extraordinary humans on the panel and others that I learn from and communicate for, we have all the solutions, we know what needs to happen, but it is a communications challenge. We need to be better at speaking to the converted, those who support the wildlife trusts and who care about the planet, but also those who are completely disconnected because they just haven't been taken care of. How we do that, I think we will find our way, but again, I'm going to be a bit bold here and say it's not actually as complicated as we might think it is. It just starts with connecting here to each other, which is what is our inherent nature.
Thank you, Liz. And I think, whenever I speak to someone, I think people, they do know stuff needs to change, and people will go on that journey. Everybody that we work with will start with, step one may be buying organic food or putting a pond in your garden. Step 10 will be campaigning, turning up at Westminster, whatever. People are going on that journey. People are definitely starting to see more connections. So we've got to tell the truth, we've got to communicate better and not be apologetic about this stuff.
To make sure that people understand that this is our life support system.
Yeah,
I was at a dinner party recently with some friends from all different sectors. Sorry, I don't mean to hog the conversation, but just, I brought up planetary boundaries and that we've broken the 7th out of 9 now. And I know I'm in the field of this knowledge, but they all looked at me like, and one is in sort of consumer goods, one is in, works for the Australian embassy, one is, they're all sort of well-read people who just looked at me with a blank face, and I went, God damn, excuse my French, but God damn it, how is it that this isn't in the news headlines? We won't survive without the planet being healthy, and I don't think the general public still realise that. And after that, sure, everything can flow.
Yeah, indeed. Craig, do you want to come in? I mean, bringing it back to the kind of just the day-to-day kind of anti-nature rhetoric. I mean, Liz is right, but I look at the news every day and nature's just a pain in the arse. It's a blocker. Get it out of the way so we can grow. This is a massive challenge for us. And do you have any thoughts on, how do we tackle that? It feels really hard.
Yeah, well, with the caveat, Debbie, that it's a PhD question.
I know.
I think the first thing to say is we need to feel our power, actually. When I rambled off those statistics earlier, I did it not just to kind of show off about the Wildlife Trust, but actually for us to realise that we've got a lot of power and a lot of support out there. And I think, there's a sort of traditional thing for charities to do, to think of ourselves as small and poor and all those kind of things. But actually in doing so, we actually sometimes limit our own ability to engage in public debate. We are, as I said, we've got the Wildlife Trust alone has about more than twice the membership of the largest political party in this country. And, actually the British people love nature. And what I can't stand is politicians that feel entitled, and we should never feel entitled, but we should at least recognise that we have massive, massive public support out there and speak on behalf of that. I think the next thing is then for us to feel much more comfortable engaging in the kind of topics we're talking about here. I think for too long in the nature sector, there's been a kind of assumption that to save nature, we just need to talk about nature, and that's failed. We need to be talking about the economy. We need to be talking about growth and overconsumption, inequality, and wealth concentrating to billionaires. And we need to talk about the way in which the economy is wired and sort of unsustainable development and so on, and challenge that. And we needed to be doing that decades ago, because the problem is the people these narratives that exist that say we just need to deregulate to get the economy going, that nature gets in the way of growth, they didn't just start recently, unfortunately. They've been happening for decades. And as a nature sector, we haven't really countered that. We haven't started trying to counter that until very recently. So we're playing catch up now. And some of these narratives are so deeply embedded now in our political and media discourse that it's really hard to try and challenge them. As much as we try to now, it's hard to challenge them. I mean, the whole kind of nonsense that bats and newts are somehow the biggest problem affecting our economy at the moment, I mean, it's absolute nonsense. But that's been a narrative that's existed for 20 years. It hasn't just existed recently. And this drip, drip, drip to the point where it means parts of the media don't even question it now. They think it is fundamentally true. And I would say it's a bit like the comparison that, say, for 20 years before 2016, if you think what happened then, there was this lie constantly told that the EU was forcing us to have straight bananas. There was never any truth in that. But because it wasn't countered, and in fact it was in the front of newspapers every day, people just believed that it was true. In the same way that lots of people do believe it's true that somehow bats and newts are holding back development. And so I think we've got to get much... I think what happens is when we know that it's not true, we might kind of laugh at it a little bit and try and laugh it off. But actually it's really important we counter those narratives as soon as they kind of pop up. That means us feeling comfortable about being political. And there's been a deliberate attempt over the last 10 years by certain vested interests to try and say that charities are not allowed to be political. I'm telling you that's not true as well. We're not allowed to be party political. So what we can't do is encourage people to vote a certain way or so on, which we wouldn't want to do anyway. But it's absolutely fine for us to engage in political debate where it affects our charitable purpose, where it affects what we're trying to do. And I think too many charities have been chilled in the last decade or so and have been too cautious about that, where to deliver our charitable purpose, we have to stand up to this nonsense and say when it's wrong and be very, very clear about what's needed if we're going to put nature in recovery. And we have to do that consistently. But there's one other final thing I would say in all of this. We also can do something that we can do often better than politicians can do, which is actually deliver on the ground. And that's why it's so important what your strategy was saying about delivering for people and place. Because actually, a lot of this political debate is quite ephemeral. And there's an awful lot of musical chairs amongst politicians. I mean, I'm now on my 10th Secretary of State for the Environment in the last 10 years, you know. And often you have these debates going on. You know, sooner or later, the government will change, Secretary of State will change. Believe it or not, sooner or later, a president on the other side of the pond will change as well. But we as the Wildlife Trust will keep going. And if we can deliver on the ground and deliver proofs of concept and deliver what works and build public support behind that, then in the long term, we win.
Thank you, Craig. I could not agree more. And that's where we excel. You know, we can just get on and do it and then show. I mean, we recently hosted, the Welsh Government came down to see us. We've been inviting DEFRA down for a while, and they have not yet come, but the Welsh Government came, just to see the work we're doing around nature-based solutions, around kind of reducing pollution and things like that. And, you know, it's impressive what we're doing. We need to tell more people and put some really hard numbers on it, because we are saving the economy millions and millions of pounds with the work we're doing. So it's really important. So thank you for that. Siôn, let's talk a bit about the tools we have, the partnerships we can forge. Protected landscapes are about 28% of England, so you guys have a big role to play, I think, in showing how land use change can work for communities, for farmers, for local economies. And I'm just super excited and keen to really get into some good delivery in partnership and, you know, shift that dial and show a different way. Have you got any thoughts on how we do that, tools for change? You are a public authority, so maybe you can't be as brave as us NGOs, but, you know, we can...
I think we probably, you know, yes, we aren't allowed to lobby.
No.
And we are primarily funded from central government. But I think if we talk about partnership in terms of that communication, a recent example, I think, where we had some information that came out in the press where Section 245 of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which is the duty that was strengthened under, well, about 18 months ago, slightly less maybe, which put a duty on statutory undertakers and public bodies to seek to further our purposes. So essentially to do more if they're operating within the national park. We heard that that was potentially going to be repealed. Again, part of the blocker narrative, which in this case, very much not true. And what was really amazing was the support. We talked to each other, and the support that we got from the NGOs as Protected Landscapes to really push back against that, which culminated in a letter, which I think both of you signed, and over 200 organisations signed in support of not repealing that duty. And that was really, for us, really quite a big reminder of how much sort of love and support there is for us, and that need for partnership in terms of how we communicate. We were also able to communicate alongside that, but our communication was slightly more sort of, formal and public sector. But without the two together, we couldn't have been as effective, and I think that's really important. But in terms of the tools we have available, the practical tools, I mean, you talked a lot about working on the ground, about communities. I think that presence and that place-based impact is going to be key. It's individual conversations, isn't it, with people over and over again. The most important people that we speak to, of course, are kids. And it's great to hear that you've got all these kids going through your programs, and we do something similar. We need to do more of that. We need to mainstream that. And I was talking to a guy the other day who's a butterfly expert who we do some work with on one of our community projects, and he talked about a word that he had made up called bioempathy, about trying to get a sense in kids that if you say to them, this pond you've just been working on, if I come and dump a load of rubbish, how does it make you feel? And when they said, oh, God, it really hurts me here, he said, right, we're there, we made that connection, we've started that. And I think making sure that we get that right. But actually, in terms of practical tools for delivery, I think we've got quite a lot in place. We've got a lot lying around. We've got the concept, at least, of agri-environment schemes. It's been difficult to start, the transition's been difficult, there's been a stop recently, a pause, but the idea that we're trying to price in the impact on nature into food production, I think is amazing. And I think we need to work out how we can dial up on that. What we need is policy consistency on that. We've got green finance, which is very new. Again, when we see that wavering in policy, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, again, looked for us at taking the need for biodiversity net gain away from small sites. So suddenly you get a chill on the market. We need policy consistency on these things. We've got all the sort of conservation work we do. I mean, Julia, you talked about buying land and rewilding it. We've got all of those tools around. But ultimately, we need to work out how we come together to deliver those. And I think, as you said, Debbie, how we communicate that we are doing this amazing work. I think protected landscapes particularly have been seen. When I entered this world 5 years ago, I was told by somebody from outside of protected landscapes that national parks were where biodiversity goes to die. And ever since, I've been absolutely determined to change that view, because it's not true. But we do need to tell the world that protected landscapes, 25, 28%, have a huge part to play, particularly in delivering 30 by 30. We tend to have the sort of least valuable or high quality land for farming, particularly, because that's in a sense why we are, in the state that we're in, because it's never been, intensively farmed. So if you are going to do land use change, if you are going to reduce the amount of food production, they're probably the least contentious places to do it, with the highest potential. And you can also, people expect, in a way, there to be greater nature in protected landscapes. So a huge part to play in that. But ultimately, it's how we do all that together, how we combine with farmers, how we use the planning system. We are a planning authority, so I've become very aware of how amazing planning is. Without a planning system, we would be in a really chaotic, horrendous situation. But it needs to work for nature, and it can, and it can work really well, and for people. And to make sure that we have thriving communities in the countryside who can get a benefit and get jobs and get employment and feel the benefit of working with nature. I think the final point on systems and systems being broken, we've talked a lot about growth. There are lots of different types of growth. When we talk about growth, we talk about GDP. And I think GDP for us, in terms of welfare and happiness, probably stopped as a sort of growth model working for us somewhere in the 1970s, if you look at the various other indices. Well, if you're a country that's, that is trying to deliver for inequality and poor people, and you're on a certain pathway, then GDP can work at the beginning. But ultimately, you get rewarded in GDP if you spend money cleaning up pollution. That counts positively. That's got to be broken. So I think working out how we can measure that differently, how we can do that within the systems that we operate in. So say, for me at least, within the national park, when we're looking at our plans, when we're looking at what kind of growth we support and what kind of things we want to measure, it's looking at natural capital growth, it's looking at community resilience growth, it's looking at growing trees, growing habitats, and growing green businesses and nature-based solutions. So what kind of growth we focus on, and then trying to communicate that positively and see if we can shift the narrative on that, I think is important.
Yeah, thank you, Siôn. We're all champing at the bit here. I can see Liz champing at the bit. I know Julia wants to come in too. But I mean, that's the absolute crux of all of this, isn't it? And, the system is broken for us and for nature, but it is not broken for the people that are benefiting from this system. Do you want to say more about the kind of wealth inequality stuff and how actually I've been watching with great interest in the last month the rise of the Green Party, and the narrative that they are putting out there is this: you can trace a line back to wealth inequality with everything, with poor outcomes for people, poor health, poverty, environmental destruction. Everything ultimately kind of points to that, really, because even the Panorama programme that we featured in on Monday was talking about, the housing system and how we've transferred public wealth to private, through right to buy council homes and all the rest of it, and now it's all in private sector hands. That's how everything is going. It just feels like there's a really important conversation to be having there. And Julie, you're in such a great place to kind of really champion some of that.
Yeah, thank you. There's so much that I'd like to come back on that. I know that Liz was chomping at the bits to come in on GDP and never being fit for purpose, and of course it's not. And what with this government, with their growth is all mantra, what occurred to me recently is everyone that's been involved in business knows that turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. And if you equate that to us as a country, so at the moment, this sort of pursuance of GDP, that treats equally us building a new house, to adding to our housing stock, to a house that's been basically destroyed by flooding, but you're paying to just basically put back what was there. So what we're not looking at with growth is we're not looking at our net wealth. We're not looking at our net assets as a country. And that's just basic, So that's just basic, you would think, basic business sense, basic economics, basic household management. You don't look at, I've been absolutely blazing the credit card, I'm doing fantastically, but I can't pay my mortgage, So that's what we've been doing as a country, and that's a mantra that we are still getting. So, as I said, when I came into a position where I could basically, I stopped practicing as a lawyer, and I basically now spend all my time trying to protect life on Earth, because that's what it comes down to. I'm not trying to talk about the environment. And initially I was really focused on, single-use plastic, single-use tackling, trying to promote reuse, trying to sort of address pollution, all this kind of thing. And then it just occurred to me that, at the background of all of this, as you said, is this extreme wealth inequality. Because how do you encourage people to walk their kids to school when we have people who pop, to the next town in a helicopter and who are constantly taking private jets and who basically, their form of showing off is, I've got the biggest super yacht. So we've got to address these issues. And if we come back to this growth issue and this concept of, have we got the ability to address all of these? Our ability to address all of these problems has been reduced and is being reduced because the power is being transferred into the hands of fewer and fewer of those people. So those people, they have corrupted our politics. They have control of our politics, So from a nature perspective, clear example this week, we were about to have this global treaty that would have addressed emissions in shipping. And lo and behold, the guy that was put in place by mega billionaires has basically just gone in and stopped 10 years of work. So we have that here. We basically, our system is working very well, as you said, Sue. And it's been working very, very well for the people who are running that system. And it's been working for a long time to basically take control of the system as they now have it. But we do have the power, as you said, and that is my mantra. We have the power. We can sit back and let this happen, or we can start saying, no, I'm not going to just be a bystander in this. I am going to start doing something about this. And that means not accepting these narratives. So I'm a member of a group called Patriotic Millionaires, and almost our reason for being is that we can talk about wealth inequality without being shut down by people saying, that's just, you're just envious. That's just, you just wish that was you. And that shuts down what is absolutely just a very normal and appropriate discussion that we need to be having. We need to be having these discussions. And on the misinformation, we are constantly being told now, and this gets like tens of thousands of hits in the media, that if you increase taxation to a reasonable level on wealth, because if we're going to somehow address this wealth that's concentrated into these few hands, we've got to get some of that back, then wealthy people will leave the country. And 10,000 odd media hits have been generated by what was effectively a piece of PR from a company whose whole business model is around helping wealthy people move around the world so they don't contribute to their society. And the media have just picked up on that, and they're just talking about it as if it's, that is the case. So we're here to talk about nature. So, why is this so relevant to nature? Well, it's relevant in many, many ways because, when we've got a government that's being told that it cannot be worrying about nature because people can't afford to feed themselves, they can't afford to put the heating on. Well, why is that the case? Well, one, we have had this huge transfer of wealth from people who go out and work to people who basically, they're just concentrating wealth in their hands. And that isn't just a differential between people who are working and very wealthy people. It's a difference between public wealth and these very wealthy people. So one of the stats that just absolutely sticks in my head is during the time that the Sunday Times Rich List has been published, so about 35 years, public wealth, so that's basically net wealth of all of us, which is looked after by our government, at the beginning of that, it was about 341 billion. So we had net wealth of 341 billion. Last time I looked, we were $1 trillion in debt. So that is basically our national wealth has just gone. It's not disappeared, it's gone, and it's transferred into the hands because in the same time, the wealthiest people in the country, their wealth has just accelerated to an incredible extent, to the point at which the 40 wealthiest families in the UK have between them more wealth than the least wealthy half of all British people. So that's 40 families with more wealth than 35 million people. That is not society working for 99.99% of people. It's society working for a tiny percentage of people. And we cannot address, we can't protect nature while that's going on. So, during that period of time, we have the return of Victorian-level diseases. So Sir Michael Marmot, he will talk about, we've now got scurvy and rickets back in the UK. Children are getting smaller in the UK. Yes, we've got an obesity crisis, but in terms of height and birth weight, children are getting smaller in this very, very wealthy country, because we are a really wealthy country. No matter what people will tell you, we're really wealthy. It's just the wealth isn't helping all of us. So, yes, we absolutely have to be running this country in a way that sort of, we are able to stand on our own feet in an increasingly volatile world. But we need to be, being willing to talk about these issues because, as I said, nature cannot thrive on its own. And actually everything, so we talked about this is all quite negative, but the positive stuff is everything that we need to do to protect nature helps people too. So everything we need to do to even the scales. So the other thing that I'm really, really involved in is trying to accelerate community energy. So community energy is an amazing opportunity. So right now, when we put use that oil and we use that gas, what we're doing is we're basically sending money out of the country because the vast majority of oil and gas is owned by foreigners, basically, if we want to talk the language of now. And so if we can then, instead of that, replace that, not only with renewable energy, which, just that word shows how it's better, it's renewable, who would choose something that's running out over something that's renewable, but on top of that, we support that being owned by communities. So the profit from that goes back into communities. We have opportunities for massive win-wins And those win-wins benefit nature and people. So there's just, this idea that there's a choice. The choice isn't between nature and British people. The choice is into allowing this extremism to continue to the point at which it's really, basically to the disadvantage of pretty much everyone, or doing something that's going to protect nature and people and our British businesses, because you talked about farming being talked as one. We talk about business as one. All of the systems at the moment which are talked about benefiting businesses, they're benefiting those big businesses that aren't good for the British people. So, sorry to run on, but there's so much to say.
I'm going to do about another 5 minutes, and then we've got questions from the audience.
Try and be really quick.
So Liz is champing at the bit. Go, Liz.
I can't help myself because it's been such a big learning curve for me, and this is, again, comes down to a communications challenge. And whenever I am on panels like this, well, not this one, because this one's like really leading the way, and I really feel excited about where we're going. But when we're talking about what's possible, what we're playing with, helping with the children, with the education, all of the things that the Wildlife Trust and other organisations are excellent at, I can't help myself every time I'm sitting there going, yes, but the economic model, yes, but. I was at the Wicklow Fund for Nature Summit a couple of weeks ago, where a big financial institution was talking about, they were making real headway with the way they were investing in green businesses and holding them accountable to what they were saying they were going to do as a greener company. But it was still driven by an incentive, and he was unapologetic about it. He was like, as long as it gets us returns, we're going to forge ahead and hold you accountable. And they were making some headway, for sure, and we have very little time to play with. But I kept on sitting there thinking, I couldn't stop myself from going, but you're still adhering to this very same model that got us here. And there are so many untruths and rhetorics that haven't served us as a society. GDP, the guy who invented GDP was asked to come up with GDP. At the time that he did it, was it the 30s, 20s or 30s, said, let me be very clear. This is a measure of the financial value of what we sell. It doesn't take into account the effect on the environment of that place, the resources that you've extracted, the pollution, how society might be affected. Do not use this as a measure of a country's success. What did we do? And also our economic model is based on this. When you mentioned the science of economics, it's based on human beings, when presented with a challenge, will be selfish, will do it this way. Again, fabricated. So when you look at, and I would urge you all, if you haven't yet read Donut Economics, The Care Economy, any book by Mariana Mazzucato, when you lean into oh wait, there is a better way, those authors, Kate Rayworth, Professor Tim Jackson, have been accused of being, oh, well, you're a socialist, you're a communist, we've tried that before, it hasn't worked. And they all very patiently and calmly go, why are we tied to the isms of the 20th century? We can evolve capitalism to serve people and planet. We've been living in a system that encourages linear degenerative operations. So we take a resource, we suck all the money out of it, and we chuck it away as waste. That's what we've been doing in the world. It's come back to bite us in the proverbial. There is very much a way, it's all there for the taking of, as an industry or as a service provider, thinking to yourself or asking the very important question, how can I produce something or create a service that benefits people and the planet? How can we prioritize both a certain amount of growth and the health of the planet, and decide not to do anything that damages our life support system? And the reason why I'm talking very fast and very fervently is because it's all there. The solutions are all there, but it's a communications challenge, because most people don't question that still on all the channels, morning shows, news shows, we talk about boosting the GDP. And when we talk about, you're right, the UK is rich, and you're talking about it in a different way, but when we talk about the UK being the 6th most powerful country in the world based on GDP, there is human sewage and agricultural runoff running down all our waterways. Is that what success is? So particularly Professor Tim Jackson's book that we've spoken about, Debbie, that talks about what is success? What if the economy was a caring economy that actually took care of people and the planet? What a novel notion. But it makes so much sense, and I think we've all been led down this path of thinking this is the way the world works. And by the way, we're not consumers. We're human beings who deserve societal well-being.
That's another great book.
Connections, great, well, yeah.
Citizens.
But citizens, right? It's like, how is it that with one economic crash after another, we are expected to solve it by paying more taxes in a system that is clearly sucking the life out of everything? You know, it really is time to take a good look. But because everything's interconnected, most people just don't have the bandwidth. Don't tell me, Liz, about what I need to lean into and learn about. I can't put food on the table. But as you said, Julia, that's the very same system that's wrecking the planet, that's making people poorer and poorer for a purpose. It drives me mad. I'm very angry about it, but our challenge is to continue doing the extraordinary work that we do as a conservation organisation with the help of all you amazing supporters, and remember that we have to reach further. We have to help with this rhetoric. We have to talk about this stuff as a conservation organisation to people who might not be our supporters or members or even really care about the nature, because as much as we have a lot of supporters and we know that people love nature here in this country, I'm sorry to say that a lot of people are completely disconnected still, and we have to think about this country and globally to how can we as conservationists evolve our role to help share some of the stuff I'm ranting about, and because it's really important. Once we know this stuff and we come together to work together, we can crack this. And my last point is, policy is part of the problem. Hard lobbying by all this very same millionaires and billionaires that want to keep the system, want to keep the status quo. The real potential is all of us as business community members, no matter how small or big your business. That's going to lead the change. So look to the climate pledge, look to the climate house in Paris that encourages business communities to prioritize the planet as well as profits. And if we change as a global community of business leaders, policy will inevitably have to follow. I really believe that that's another part of the conversation that biologists and conservationists and scientists should be engaging in as part of our change-making initiatives and projects.
Love you, Liz.
I do rant, I'm very sorry, I'm a ranter.
So look, we need to open up for questions very shortly, but I can see you two are wanting to come in. Craig, are you?
I'll just be very brief. I just want to give a very tangible example of the kind of things that are being talked about here. In the 1970s and 1980s, of course, you had the big rush for North Sea oil, involving many countries around the North Sea basin. And it's really there's a real stark difference between the way Norway, what they did with the wealth from it, and the way we did UK's wealth. Norway broadly took the revenues from North Sea oil and put them in their sovereign wealth fund, which is now one of the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. And just the interest and dividends that they get on that sovereign wealth fund every year now in Norway pays for the entire health and education budget in Norway every single year. Now, we're a bigger population, bigger country. I don't know for definite if we'd done the same thing here, whether that would have paid for the entirety of our health and education budget in the UK, but would be a lot better off than we are, because actually what we did as a country is instead enable those all to go into private profits and actually to fund tax breaks and tax cuts in the 1980s. And why does that matter to nature? It's because now, this year, today, we're being told that there's not enough money in the public sector, in tax revenues in this country, to pay for the transition to sustainable farming or to pay for nature recovery and things like that, because there's barely enough money even to pay for our health service and education and so on. So 40 years on, nature is really suffering because of that decision to enable the wealth from North Sea oil, putting aside climate change issues anyway, just for a second, but the wealth from North Sea oil went to private wealth rather than public wealth. And that's just one tiny example of why this matters for nature.
Absolutely. Before I bring you in, Sue, just to say, I went to that meeting for you, Craig, and looked the Secretary of State in the eye when I was challenging him on the planning bill. And the phrase he said was, unless we get growth in this country, there's no money for your nature. Which is exactly what he said. And this is the mindset. Destroy stuff, make some money, then you can have a few crumbs.
So how do we change that story? How do we change that story? Now, I love a bit of anger. I think that's my default emotional state. No, but it's right. So I would say...
Good angry.
I would say that anger is the correct and appropriate emotional response to the scale of injustice that we face. And I can say that with confidence because the former Archbishop of Canterbury told me that. So when we are told that the right answer is to be more partnershipy or more collaboratively, we are taking a hug to a nuclear war. We are in the wrong game. We are playing the wrong game. So how do we change the story? I think we have to lift the veil. I'm really struck by the extent to which we all use the passive voice, as if these things are happening in the abstract, as if they're kind of happening through some misfortune or accident, and it's a bit of a surprise to us. The bats and newt story is a dead cat strategy. That phrase was given to the Chancellor by lobbyists to deflect her attention on things that we wanted to talk about. Business leaders pay lobbyists to do that work for them. They say one thing in public, and then they pay those lobbyists privately to foment those arguments, to shore up those arguments that then detract from our work. So what we need to be doing is, I think it's time to stop talking about nature and let's take the fight to them. And let's start talking about the way that business operates, the way that it pays lobbyists. So let's start naming them. Let's start making it really, really hard to get an invite to a good dinner party if you're one of the people who carries on doing that kind of work. It has to become really antisocial to be working in that world, because those are the people who are literally profiting from our world on fire. We have to name it, we have to call it out, we have to point to it, we have to take the fight there.
Okay, fight and talk. I love it. Okay, we're going to open up.
I'm just in awe of all of you. You have so many insights, you're so brilliant. But I want to challenge you a bit further. You're not going quite far enough. I mean, I love what Sue was just saying. But, Debbie, you said you've got to roll this rock up the hill. Surely that's what they invented helicopters for. Let's drop the rock on the top of the hill, surround it by us guys, and say, we've introduced beavers, we've introduced wildcats, we've introduced wild boar, we've introduced the things that are crucial to our ecosystems. The public is on our side. The science is on our side. There's just no reason not to. Not a single person, as far as I know, I may be wrong, has been prosecuted for wild releases. We've got goshawks now. Who said we could do that? There's thousands of wild beavers out there. Who said they could do that? Nobody. Let's just get that rock up.
Let's just do it, he's saying. Let's just do it.
Just do it.
Thank you. Stephen is a member of our Rewilding Network.
I've got beavers sometimes.
Awesome. I'm not going to publicly say that we're going to break the law, but I'm with you in spirit. Charlotte.
Hi, Charlotte Rose. I'm a trustee. Really inspiring conversation. I really resonated, particularly Liz, with your point around it's not as overwhelming as it sometimes feels it is, and I'm constantly racked with eco-anxiety. So I really hope that it can be as simple as that. What's the one tangible thing that we as individuals can do that will make a difference and start helping to change that system? Because it starts with individuals. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Great question. Do you want to take that?
Tangible, for me, I think we probably should all answer this. But for me, the first step, and I'm sorry to say this if this is not helpful, but it's about finding your tribe. And you've already started with a tribe here, but it's about finding whatever you do in your work, whatever you do in your community, is to make a concerted effort to connect and to start talking about these conversations and seeing how you might, as a small community locally or a group of businesses in your local area, all start to do things slightly differently. And there's lots of resources. I mean, you can start with Debbie and her teams about how you might get the support to start walking the walk more with respect to prioritizing different things in your business, for example. And Donut Economics is a brilliant resource as well. Birmingham have a great initiative called Civic Square, where they are moving ahead with prioritizing not, profits above all else and societal well-being. God forbid we should have education, water, all of that stuff taken care of. So there are lots of resources to support you. You wouldn't be sort of shot in the dark. What are we all going to do? We're all together in this room now. We know what we need to do. So I think it's about connecting to each other and building capacity and empowerment together, and then looking to the resources that are everywhere. We went, part of the Federation went on a trip to Paris, and we were in this building called Climate House, and I had a conversation with them afterwards about what they're doing. And actually it's a bit like the Climate Pledge for bigger businesses. Look up the Climate Pledge as well. A whole bunch of businesses, I think it's about 500 in the world now, who are committing to doing things differently. For me, again, it's like if you're not prioritizing profit above all else, you're on to something. And then Climate House in Paris is a place where they are literally helping people to network. So if you have a particular goal in your business, they will hook you up with lots of different people doing the same, so that they're building momentum, building a community. So I think for me, the first tangible stage is that community, because with that, you're bolstered, you get skills and knowledge from different people who are trying to do the same thing as you. So I hope that makes sense. For me, that's step one, and then spread the net. This is about connection and getting the expertise from people like Debbie at the Wildlife Trust, the Federation, and other organisations. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I think that's absolutely right, because it can feel, and when I talked about pushing a rock uphill, that's sometimes how it feels. Yes. But the minute you connect with somebody else, and you guys are amazing inspiration to me, I feel powerful. I feel like I can do it. When you do that, anything's possible.
It's a strange one, but it's actually the very core of who we are. Like, if you're in a group of people, you just feel better. What? Social creatures? I walked in here today, had a bit of a rough week. I walked in here today, I saw the Wildlife Trust sign, and I genuinely, every cell in my body sighed, and I grinned from ear to ear, because I was with my family. I can't tell you how much I've gotten out of being part of this federation over the past few years. And it's biological. I feel like I can do anything because I'm surrounded by people who get it. And that just tells you everything you need to know about how we're going to move forward.
Brilliant. Thank you.
If I can, Dave, I just want to add to the brilliant stuff Liz is saying here, because it's so right that the way you deal with this, none of us can deal with it on our own. The way you deal with it is to be part of a community or a tribe or whatever that's like this. But the really exciting thing happens is when you connect communities to each other on this, and that becomes a movement. And if you look at all the big social changes that have ever happened in human history, they've happened because new movements have driven them. And you got that kind of power. And the only other thing I'd say in this, we need to recognise that the pushback we're getting on some of our agenda at the moment is only happening because of previous successes.
They're scared of us.
They're scared of us. You wouldn't have even that orange person over the other side of the Atlantic. He's only doing what he's doing because actually, globally, the movement for a more sustainable world has been making some kind of progress. So actually, if you look at the history of humanity and the history of social change, it's only ever happened in these kind of, when you go through these cycles. Even things like trying to campaign for the abolition of slavery. It's not like that was a nice linear change. You had the abolitionists campaigned against slavery, and it was when that campaign was doing well, you actually had a pro-slavery movement form in Britain. Guess what it said? If we ban slavery, it will harm our competitiveness. It will harm our business. Exactly the same messages we're getting now. So if we accept that that's how change happens, I say bring it on. Let's get through these waves as fast as we can. And our job to drive this change is not to resist the fact that change is happening in these waves. Our change is to recognise on any one issue, are we in the ascendant? Are we moving forward? And then we can be really propositional. And our job is to push the wave up the beach as far as it's more than it's gone before and get higher than it's gone before. Or if we're facing pushback, as we are now, our job is to move into resistant mode and stop it going back down the beach to where we were before. And overall, if we keep going through those cycles, we will win and we'll finally get to the high water mark of change. That's how change happens. It's always how change has happened in human history. So I would say this whole movement, this whole sustainability movement, we've got to grow up and realise that's the game we're involved in. And it's not going to be easy, but if we're prepared for it, we'll get there and we'll win.
Thank you. I think Siôn, come in.
Just building on all of that, really, just very briefly. So my wife's a psychotherapist, and she sometimes turns to me and says, we have to talk about difficult things. And I always go, oh, God, here we go. I think as an individual, we have to talk about difficult things to people who don't necessarily want to hear it in a way which is curious and allows them the conversation to happen. And we have to keep doing that and doing that and doing that. as well as all the other work that you do. And the fact that you're here today, obviously, is already a great step. But I always think that when I'm thinking, someone's saying something that I don't agree with, I think, oh, I'll just shut up, and then I remember my wife's voice. We have to talk about difficult things.
Thank you. That's a really great thing to remember. Okay, where are we going now? I can see there's 2 hands over there. Let's start with the gentleman here, and then the gentleman here in the sort of rust orangey coloured top, and then the gentleman there. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the panel. Fantastic, and thank you for all the good work you do. I'm the Green Group leader in Winchester City Council. I'm also a trustee of Winchester Action on Climate Crisis. I'm a resident in the Central Meon Valley, and I live in the South Downs National Park. That's the context. I wanted to pick up on some of the tools that I have to use as the gatekeeper in planning and so on. One of the things that's not been mentioned so far by the panels is ecosystem services, and I'm not sure why. Now, I've just had to go through a planning application in the South Downs National Park where that statement is required, and the applicant has to pick up and identify the positive and negatives in terms of ecosystem services. I don't think it's working very well. And the other question that I would like to ask with respect to that is, if you're not in the national park, you don't have to do that. Now, surely all planning authorities should be using ecosystem services approach. That would strengthen an understanding by planning committee about the harm and so on. So I think there's something there that we collectively in the nature world may want to be pushing. The other thing in terms of tools, local nature recovery strategy you haven't mentioned, it's coming. How do we optimize or weaponize that? And the other things that are in our tool bag, nutrient neutrality credits, carbon credits, biobank credits and so on. So could I ask for your opinion, please, and how the hell we get the current system to work better before we need to do the systemic change? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great question. I'll go to Siôn first, but I've got a few things I can also add.
It's never a panel goes by without a planning question that comes up. I mentioned earlier that I think the planning system can really work for us. I don't think it always does. One of the pieces of work that we're doing in the South Downs, we're calling Planning for Nature, where we're really looking at all the policies that we have to see how we can do more to allow for the planning system to support nature recovery. For example, if you want to create a pond for nature, you need a planning application, you need planning permission. On top of that, you probably need biodiversity net gain to replace the biodiversity that you've got rid of by digging the pond for biodiversity. And so there are opportunities, I think, there for us to smooth that forward. And also in terms of how standard applications go within the park, what we can do, where we could maybe push a little bit more on things like Swift bricks, or whether we can push more on sort of climate adapted design, et cetera, we're trying to see what we can do within the national park. Obviously, we're constrained by the national framework, and if we push too far, we get JR'd, which is something which I'm not entirely averse to if it means that we prove a point and we try and push forward. I think this also is about the difference between being in the park and outside the park. Now, obviously, we should be doing best practice everywhere. And I often get this is, why is a tree more special in a national park than outside? Why is a river more special? Why should our rivers be cleaner? And so they shouldn't really. But actually, we expect them to be. And we expect that standard to be higher. And I think there's a leadership role for us in terms of raising that standard. And it goes to the point, I think, Liz, you were saying about policy. It might have been Liz, it might have been you, Craig, but about how we shouldn't be waiting for policy and then follow policy. We should be leading to try and get policy to change. And I think being a national park and a planning authority affords us really a very special opportunity to do that. Because we're not just a normal planning authority, we're one that really is there for nature, is there for the environment, is there for natural beauty, and for access to the outdoors, and there's a lot more we can do. So that's something that I'm very keen to push on. I think there was a question on nature-based solutions and green finance, but I'll leave that to others. But
I mean, I'd quite like to just come in on the nature. We use the phrase nature-based solutions as a bit of a catch-all. The way we talk about that, it's nutrient neutrality, BNG, the kind of the whole gamut of what you might call nature-based solutions. And actually, those things also do deliver ecosystem services. How you measure that, is not universally kind of standardised quite yet. But I don't know if you know, we were the first people in England to deliver the first nutrient neutrality schemes in the Solent. And it was a very interesting time because going back a little bit, we had this thing in 2018-19 where there were no houses getting planning permission. Everything was held for nearly 2 years because of the nutrient neutrality rules. Then there was a whole kind of campaign to get rid of the habitats regulations because, surprise, surprise, holding back growth, etc. So we stepped into that space, we lent in, to use Liz's phrase, and we worked with Natural England to design and develop and deliver the first nutrient neutrality schemes. For me, it's really important that we actually do deliver that because A, we can design it in a way that is as good as possible. We can deliver gain, we actually deliver more pollution reduction than we're offsetting. Now, the legal rules are just to offset. So if we only play by the rules, we're just offsetting. But if we do it, we can add more value, we can do more than offset, we can push that bar ever higher and demonstrate those benefits. So for me, I think leaning into delivering nature-based solutions is really important. And also we want communities to benefit. We're trying to create jobs through the nature-based solutions work that we do, etc. And, there's a big private market in that, which is fine. But again, it's that private capital. They don't necessarily go over and above. So they'll deliver B&G for 30 years and then what? If we deliver it, it's forever. So I feel like we owe it to make these things work and to do it ourselves and show how it can be done well.
I think I'll just add, I think biodiversity net gain and nature credits and nature-based solutions as a concept are fantastic. What you're trying to do is actually is fix some of the problems with GDP. You're trying to build in the real price of what your development is and what your growth is. The problem is that it requires long-term commitment to policy for the markets to work. It's a compliance market. It means that you're actually, you're creating a legal framework, which means that people have to do it. Now, if governments waver on that, then the market's not going to work. Yeah. And that, for me, feels like the fragility in the system that isn't helpful. But overall, we agree, and we've discussed this, Debbie, that actually this is a really good thing to do. I personally think that protected landscapes have a huge opportunity to do more of it than elsewhere because of that point that it's least contentious, highest potential. And actually you can work at landscape scale instead of having small units of biodiversity net gain. You can start to think about how you do it on a big connected landscape. And that's something that we're also leaning into.
Yeah. Thank you. Go on, quickly. Got a couple more questions.
Just very quickly. I think sometimes people might think, why are the Wildlife Trust doing this, taking BNG and that kind of thing, and they're enabling development. And my view on that is that if that's going to happen anyway, I want the money to go to the Wildlife Trust, so I want it to go to a charity. Because let's just remember, if that money goes elsewhere, it goes to a private landowner, that's only as good as enforcement. And we know that enforcement doesn't necessarily happen because just look at our water companies. So when the money goes to a wildlife trust, it's going to an organisation that wants those things to happen anyway. So whatever you think about these schemes, if the money's out there, then you're the right home for it.
Good, thank you. I'm glad you said that. So the gentleman there with the orangish coloured top. Thank you. And then I think we've probably got time for, what time are we? We've got about 10 minutes, so probably got time for another couple.
Okay, thank you, panel. I'm just blown away with the range of knowledge that's sitting in front of us. It's a sort of a unique opportunity, but I would like to appeal to your imagination. And I wanted to ask if you could imagine housing developments, and Siôn perhaps just touched on it, that have a positive impact on the environment. I don't mean net zero. I don't mean just net zero. I mean positive. That it's something. Is that something that is your imagination can entertain? And if it is, how does one get it out there?
Thank you. Who wants to pick that up? Do you want to start, Craig?
Great question. We don't have to imagine it. right across the country, wildlife trusts have been working over 20 years on trying to demonstrate what nature-positive housing can look like. So perhaps one of the most astonishing examples is where London Wildlife Trust worked with local planning authorities and developers in South London in Kidbrooke, enabling the development of 4,500 new homes, but creating over 30 hectares of new wildlife habitat at the same time. And we're talking in South London here. Absolutely astonishing. And that's a development which is, you know, it's the kind of place you'd want to live, you know, and it's got affordable housing, absolutely affordable housing at the centre of it, but it's a very nature-rich development, and there was not much nature there before. I live in Cambridge, and just on the outskirts of Cambridge, there's a wildlife trust reserve called Trumpington Meadows. And 20 years ago, it was just sort of an agricultural test area. Now it's one of the most, it was developed alongside a development for new housing, and now it's one of the most visited green spaces in and around Cambridge, certainly by locals. And it's a wonderful, wonderful wildlife trust nature reserve, and it was created at the same time as building this housing estate. Or you go to Cambourne, which was a new town built in Cambridgeshire about 20, 30 years ago. And there's unquestionably, it was done very much in partnership with the local wildlife trust at the time, unquestionably more nature there now as a result of the housing development than was there beforehand. So there's loads of examples across the country of where this can be done. And that is what is so frustrating about this insane political debate at the moment that pivots, you know, either housing or nature, when we've done so much to demonstrate on the ground about how you can grow the economy, you can create new housing, and you can grow more nature hand in hand in an integrated way.
Thank you. Okay, we've only really got 5 minutes, so I'm desperate to get a couple more questions in. Who's got their hand up? There and there. Can we get these both of you in? I'll tell you what, can you do both questions and then we'll answer them together to save a bit of time? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caroline Dibden from Community Planning
Caroline.
Alliance. So I'm come across Debbie and Craig as what we do. It was a little bit going back to pushing back against the lobbyists, because I think at the moment they're really winning. Every time we object to anything on the grounds of either nature or lack of affordable housing or the fact that it's not net zero, we just get told we're horrible, nasty NIMBYs and that you don't care about young people having housing. And the rhetoric is really demoralising people, but it's pervasive. It's working all the way through, not just from the Chancellor and the Housing Secretary, but all the way through to the Planning Inspectorate and the decisions that local planning authorities are having to make, going back to what Danny said.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. Let's just have the other question as well, if that's okay, lady with the striped shirt.
Thank you. Fantastic panel. It's so powerful to hear what you're saying about this kind of systems change. Just really wanted to touch on purpose-led businesses. So we're seeing a bit of an explosion, actually, of purpose-led businesses in the UK, particularly micro and small enterprises. For a bit of context, I chair the B Corp community for Hampshire, Dorset and the Isle of Wight, which is why this is something that's quite I'm passionate about. So apologies if I start talking quite quickly. So really what we're seeing is that businesses that are purpose-led are outperforming those that aren't. Even in the FTSE 350, they're more resilient to change. They're seeing 30% better performance than their peers. And we're also seeing from reports that came out from Demos that actually if you are purpose-led as a company, that could mean £44 a week in the back pocket of the lowest paid worker. So this is significant, and by purpose we are talking about, yes, those social changes as well as environmental, and not just talking about carbon, but yes, biodiversity, etc. So these businesses that are committed to this change, they are being challenged in 2026 even further, quite rightly. And one of the things is on collective action. So there's two parts to this. One is, what would be your specific ask to these companies that are purpose-led and are really on your side and have backed things like the Better Business Act? They're being challenged on collective action. What's your ask of them? And my second question is around, what challenge do you think the language that we're using currently is actually creating almost a barrier or gatekeeping some of the actions that are possible just purely from being hyper-focused on things like net zero or creating all these different acronyms that, to be honest, I love what I do, and even for me sometimes it gets a little bit of a brain muddle. So yeah, 2 parts there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Sorry, I didn't recognise you. We've met many times. I feel a lot of this does come down to language. I mean, you've touched on it, both of you, around how we talk about this stuff. There was a really fantastic report that came around the other day from More in Common. And, you know, we've got to start making all this stuff totally relevant to people's everyday lives. What's in it for me? You know, we're not selfish creatures, but I think a lot of people need to know what's in it for me. So we've got to demystify it, get rid of the jargon, and really start talking about the benefits and linking things like purpose-led business and where people want to live and work. They want to live and work in places with nice housing, with nature-rich spaces, not in kind of soulless housing estates with plastic grass. You know, we've got to link all of these narratives together and tell a much better, more positive story and a vision for the future. You know, if we can cut through, we don't always want to just defend, do we? We want to tell a different story, and I think that's part of what we've got to do here. But do you want to come in, Craig or Liz?
Just about the language, I think that's one of our biggest challenges. Again, sorry, David Attenborough, communication. Yeah. You know, our biggest challenge for saving the planet is a communications challenge. And it includes all of these things that we accept as the norm, as rote, from GDP to net zero. Good grief, don't even get me started getting angry at the net zero lie. You know, like what really is out there to handle the carbon to get us to net zero. There isn't a single built structure or infrastructure that can handle that. There's one in America that's still carbon negative, even though, what am I saying, carbon positive. You know, so I think part of all of this, again, it's not simple. It makes our heads hurt, but we need to lean into the interconnectedness of all of these challenges and just get braver. And you will only feel braver and more bolstered if you do this in community. So one of the biggest challenges about the rhetoric is to inform. We need to be better as communicators on different platforms. We're getting less and less commissioned on the main broadcasters in this space. So we're all talking to each other about how we can get the right information out there. Truth is at a premium. How did we get here? So how do we all, as conservationists and communicators, help with all of the issues that both of you mentioned? And now is the time when I'm going to say, like, I want to see this done to the public. It's going to take some funding. We all pull together as a federation and different organizations. I want to see panels like this done, rolled out, some kind of roadshow around the UK, live streamed at the same time. We need to get this information out of our bubble, and that's how we start shifting all of those things that you've rightly mentioned. That's how we start to break all those barriers down and call those to account, hold them to account for the rhetoric they're still able to spout, the languages and the wording that they use that really needs to be questioned. Again, it's about momentum and it's about building this movement that bursts out of our bubble. And I wholeheartedly encourage you all to speak to your friends, to your relatives, to people you meet in the park, about certain elements that have really caught your imagination today. Talk to each other, get the conversation flowing. And when are we doing this on a roadshow, lads? Because I'm in.
Let's keep going, Thank you. Okay, so we are out of time. If anyone has a last word in 30 seconds, I will grant you that. But we're pretty much out of time, and I'm so sorry. We could talk for hours, couldn't we?
It's back to your question earlier. If there's one thing that you do as a result of what you've heard today, it's write to your MP. MPs are not particularly leaders, they are followers. They will follow what they think their voters want of them. So the one thing that you can do is write to your MP and organise everybody else in your community to write to your MP too.
Thank you. Okay.